Welcome everyone to this event. Thanks for joining us. Welcome Nani, and Anna-Lena will also be joining us any minute as soon as her internet is working. Thanks for taking the time to spending the next hour with us. My name is Julia Kloiber. I will be moderating today's conversation, and I've prepared some questions for Nani and Anna-Lena, but there's also time at the end of the conversation, about 15 minutes, where you from the audience can ask questions. And please do so in the chat. We will collect all the questions and I will make sure to ask them at the end of our conversation. Let me start with a brief introduction of the two Ashoka Fellows that are joining us today. Nani Jansen Reventlow is a human rights lawyer who specializes in freedom of expression and strategic litigation. We will hear in a minute what strategic litigation is and means. She's the founding director of the Digital Freedom Fund, a fund that advances digital rights in Europe through strategic litigation. Nani is also a lecturer in law at the Columbia Law School and is the recipient of various awards. Among them is the Harvard Law School's Women Inspiring Change Award. Hi, Nani. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, so great to be here.
And the second fellow who will be joining us in just a minute is Anna-LenavonHodenberg. Anna-Lena is a TV journalist by training. In 2015, she joined the civil society organization Campact, where she led campaigns against racism and against right-wing populism. She's an expert who researches hate on the web and strategies of the new right. Thanks to Anna-Lena's work, Hessen became the first state in Germany to dedicate a separate package of measures in its coalition agreement to fight online hate. Anna-Lena is the founder of HateAid, a nonprofit organization, the first and only counseling center in Germany that supports victims of digital violence. We here at Ashoka welcomed both of them a couple of weeks ago as new fellows. I remember the call with the sparklers and music very vividly. And let me tell you one more time, we're very excited to have you on board. And as the title of this conversation alludes to, today we will be talking about human rights in the digital age. And by digital age, we mean the age and time that we're living in right now. We're going to talk about human rights and how they are threatened by new technologies and what we can do against this and how we can strengthen our human rights. And throughout this conversation, you will get to know Nani and Anna-Lena better and also the respective organizations that they founded. And since we have a lot to discuss today, I want to dive right into the conversation and also say hi to Anna-Lena. I'm glad that the internet connection is working. I just introduced the two of you and said that we're very glad that you are part of the Ashoka fellow cohort. And I've prepared a warm-up question for the two of you. Since we will be talking about digital technology and the internet, I'm curious to hear from you about your first memories of the internet, maybe some fun chat names or other like first kind of memories that stayed with you. Nani, do you want to go first?
Wow, that's.
Okay, now Nani is.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Apologies. So we're doing very well with our digital connections for this conversation. I think my first recollection of like using the internet for anything was actually a Hotmail account, which sounds very retro. I think by now, I think my mom still has a Hotmail account and my sister for some reason also. I haven't managed to get them out of that yet, but. That was when I was actually just in university. And that was the first time that I actually started to use the internet for anything kind of like daily, very practical, and like just to kind of like write messages to friends. So Hotmail and MSN Messenger, obviously, because, you know, that was before we had WhatsApp and Signal and so on. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. Anna-Lena, what's your first memory of
Me
the
too. I
internet?
also had a Hotmail account, and I set it up because when I was 15 and I went to the United States to do a high school year, and none of my friends had internet, so I could only connect. My mother then got internet at home, and she was the only one I could write emails to. But yeah, so I could only go every day 1 hour in high school into the library in like study hour, and then they helped me. These old ladies helped me to set up an internet account, and I must admit I still have it. Because yeah, it's just for, I don't know, there's still some people who I know for so many years writing me there. So yeah, and
Nice.
I remember ICQ. Do you remember ICQ? Ha!
Also an important one. So
That
many
was
things
my
have
first
changed.
chat. Yeah.
Many things have changed. We're constantly online these days, but email is still around, right? So yeah, good to see that. And talking about like yourselves and also your backgrounds, I'm curious, because both of you, like Nani as a lawyer and Anna-Lena trained as a journalist, like how did you enter the field of tech policy or digital rights? Was this something that you were planning, or was there a specific event that led to you like entering this field at the intersection of society and technology? Whoever wants to go first. Anna-Lena, maybe?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, I can't say it was always my interest and I followed it from all along. I just started to use the internet like a normal user because it was there and it started to become a bigger factor in my life. And when I was a journalist, I didn't really, well, it became integrated in how our work changed. No? And then I started doing my campaigns at Campact, and I really stumbled when I started to research tactics of the extreme right, propaganda tactics, and also tactics to interfere in modern democracies. That was the moment where I really, I started to get involved in the subject, and where it kind of really captured me, and where I started to then very intensely learn about the subject and then make it the center of my work.
For me also, it was something that just kind of happened gradually. When I started working on human rights, that was actually on defending the rights of journalists and bloggers around the world. So originally when I started working there, I would only say journalists, but at some point that also became bloggers. And there was an increasing kind of like interest in defending the right to freedom of expression online, particularly in countries with repressive regimes. Using a blog as an outlet was the only option to kind of like write critical news. So that became more and more part and parcel of the work. That is also the role in which I kind of like discovered strategic litigation as a tool for change. And that kind of like led me to working on this issue in the digital context via a project that I did at Harvard that really looked at collaboration in strategic litigation to keep the internet open and free, to then the Digital Freedom Fund.
Great. We've prepared a short little clip that we're going to play now, and then we're going to talk about the divide between the digital, the online world, and the offline world, and whether there is this divide or whether it's one thing. So Clara, please play the clip for us.
The data we leave online help decide whether we get apartments, get loans, what job we get. Digital and analog life can no longer be separated. The problem? Technology is not neutral. How does data affect our human rights and our being?
Thank you for this clip. And this is a topic actually that both of you have brought up in earlier conversations, the divide between the online and the offline world, or the divide that some people talk about. A lot of people still look at the digital context as something that is separate from the real world. And there is hardly any aspects of our lives right now that are not engaging with technology. Nani, I saw that you at the Digital Freedom Fund, you have a series called Digital Rights as Human Rights. Tell us more. What do you mean by that? And what do you say to people who are still thinking in this two divided spheres?
Yes, indeed. So we indeed work under the norm of digital rights are human rights. There is a slightly more traditional way of looking at digital rights as only concerning privacy, data protection, and free flow of information online. But we take the position that all human rights, as engaged in the digital context, are digital rights. So also economic, social, and cultural rights. So, and I think that over the past year and a bit now that we've been living through the pandemic, this has become a lot more clear for people actually that, you know, it's not just privacy and data protection, it's your right to access healthcare, it's your right to education. There's all sorts of aspects of our lives that are engaged, for which we have to engage with technology in order to function. And the divide is a completely artificial idea in my view. Because many of the things that we do online have an impact on the offline world. And I'm sure that Anna-Lena can speak to that in much more detail in the context of her work. But also, as you just pointed out, Julia, there's hardly any aspect of our lives in which we can escape technology anymore these days. So yeah, it's intertwined to a degree that we can't really unravel it anymore.
Yeah, Anna-Lena, in your work, I mean, we see sadly, an incredible amount of hate online. And you've mentioned in an interview that I read that people often distinguish between an online identity of someone and an offline identity. So someone might be like spreading hate online, but then there's the offline identity of this person that's very different. Like, what do you say to those people, or what are like the arguments that people put forward, or the thinking behind this?
You know, so I can say that I can reveal that this, the last time I heard this, which I have heard many times before, was by a policeman who said that to us, that a lawyer also in a discussion said that to me. You can't, you know, the people are different online, they have a different identity, they act different. And yeah, and I can only say from our consultation, from our practice, because we have the victims of digital violence who come in, and at the point where you see people who are in depression, who have panic attacks, who can't sleep at night anymore because they have anxiety, because they've been attacked online. This is like, you know, the moment where you have to realize, okay, there is no online world and no offline world. There's just me moving in different worlds. And this also applies to the perpetrators. There's no this nice person and this other person. There is this one person that is acting differently, maybe in different environments, but it's still the same person and it's still the same personality. And we know from perpetrators in other situations that they can act in different environments, also in the analog world, very differently. So I think the problem is that we have just talked about Hotmail, we talked about ICQ, and I think at that time it really applied. We just went maybe once a week on the internet and we just used it like, you know, this random tool that we very specifically go to a certain place and then we do a certain thing, and when like to the supermarket. But this is not the case anymore. We have our own personality in the digital world. We move in a broad space there, and so I think this has changed. And I think maybe also some people have not realized that this has happened, and maybe this is why this misconception is still out there.
Do you think part of the problem is that many of the public digital spaces that we're inhabiting online are designed by big tech companies who are driven by clicks, who are driven by attention, that, I mean, also controversial content leads to a lot of clicks. Hate might also lead to a lot of clicks and incentivize some of the structures or some of the things there. So is this something you see as problematic? Do we have to redesign the public digital spaces for like less hate or like a better kind of to be able to better fight hate and also mis and disinformation?
Absolutely. As I think so. I was on a press conference yesterday where somebody said the social media needs an update, you know, and that's exactly it. As I thought that was so like smart to say that. Yes, I absolutely do think so. This is like what we just talked about. They just started as these little companies, and also if you look at legislation, if you look at the e-commerce. You know, the legislation in Europe, it was really like very tech friendly, very like startup friendly. They should have lots of, you know, freedom to develop, to be, because they started out very small and nobody could imagine that they would be like these real big factors, these public spaces that we all use right now, even more now during the pandemic. And their role has completely changed, and they are not these free marketplaces where everybody can just say what they want and everybody is equal, as we have all hoped at the beginning. But yeah, they are companies, private companies. They have a business model. They have they have economic goals that they want to reach, and they are going to follow, you know, these goals. And so hate is something that clicks well. Violence and controversial discussions, also exaggerations, also lies are something that make people interact. And that's why, yes, we need to, and regulation is always this bad word. Somebody, I remember in my first podcast, somebody said, but you can't use regulation, this word. And I think, yes, you can use it, because, I mean, we also live in the analog world. We live in a regulated world. We just need to think about what we want to regulate, and we need to think about it, you know, we need to think about it well, and do it one step at a time. But yes, I think social media absolutely needs an update, and we need to change circumstances, because they are a public space, and we need to ensure that all people can move there freely and know and also enforce their rights.
Now we've heard regulation and litigation quite a couple of times. So maybe let's check out the second clip and then talk about litigation, what it is, what it means, if it's that abstract or if it's like very tangible and easy to understand. So Clara, please play the second clip for us.
When the internet came up, there was a vision. A place where everyone is free and every voice deserves a hearing. It has become a place where hatred increases, defamation exists, shitstorms rage, discourses become distorted. How can we react to that? And what are the consequences for society?
How can we react to that? Litigation is one way of reacting to some of that, a term that comes up on both of your websites, that both of your organizations are working on strategic litigation. Maybe Nani, you as a lawyer, like what is litigation? You want to kick us off and like give us a brief maybe intro on the topic?
So litigation more generally is like any dispute that basically ends up before a court or a tribunal, or in, for example, arbitration. So anywhere where you kind of engage a third party to decide on a dispute that you have or a claim that you want to pursue. What we focus on specifically is strategic litigation, and that is looking at it as a tool that's embedded in a broader strategy for change. So rather than only focusing on what your strategy is to win a case in court for a specific party or a specific set of parties, you look at the broader social change that you can bring about. So you're pursuing bigger systemic change through a court case that you link to other initiatives, such as advocacy, such as policy work, such as engaging, bringing about a broader public debate about an issue. And that also, in a way, makes it possible that if you win the case, that you have better opportunities to implement the outcome. But it also gives you the opportunity that if you lose your case, you can still pursue the cause that you are trying to achieve. So let's just say that you brought a case on a specific issue, you're not successful in the court, but around the case, you campaigned, you engaged in public engagement, public advocacy. And because of that, people are so well informed about the issue at stake that they are very angry that the court didn't decide the way that they should have. And they start, for example, pressuring lawmakers to bring the change about in a different way. So it's really thinking about how can you embed litigation as one of the tools that you have in your broader strategy for change.
Mm-hmm. And what are organizations in Europe that you're working with? And maybe also a case, like be it a recent case or a highlight from the past couple of years working with these organizations?
So, one of the cases that we're very happy that to have had a chance to support was a case in the Netherlands that dealt with basically pre-crime detection. And you know, we may have all seen or not seen a Minority Report, but maybe remember Tom Cruise kind of with all the screens and so on, and these individuals that were kind of predicting when crimes was going to take place. So the Dutch government did something similar, but then with an algorithm. What they did is that they coupled a whole bunch of databases that were connected to social services, put all those data together, ran an algorithm over it, and basically that algorithm indicated who was most likely to commit benefits fraud. So it didn't detect whether or not someone actually had done that, but just if they were likely to do so. Based on that flag, it was possible for the public authorities to investigate those individuals more closely, of course, increasing the chances that they would find something, you know, enormously, because yeah, you get a self-fulfilling prophecy there, obviously. The algorithm or the program was actually rolled out predominantly in neighborhoods that had a high immigration rate and a low income rate. So it was also particularly deployed in more marginalized communities in the Netherlands. A number of organizations, human rights organizations, labor unions, a number of journalists, and a number of other human rights organizations kind of banded together and filed a strategic case and managed to get the legislation that was underpinning this algorithm to be struck down on grounds of having violated the right to privacy.
Wow, and the role of the Digital Freedom Fund is to bring together these actors to support them with funds, or what's your role, your specific role?
So this was actually a really nice case because we were engaged in many different ways. So one of the things that we do indeed is provide financial support for strategic cases, and that was also the situation here. But we also work to connect litigators with others who might be helpful for their cases. We organize workshops where people can coordinate, strategize, further develop their case ideas. So in this situation, the organizations that were involved in bringing the case participated in a litigation retreat where they further kind of like developed their litigation ideas. Through that, they connected to the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who ended up filing an expert opinion in the case. And they also connected with others around it. So this way, the whole case and also the outcome of it had a lot more traction.
Nice, impressive work. Anna-Lena, I saw that you just recently launched something. I don't know if it's a strategic litigation campaign, but I saw that you launched something with Renate Künast, where she basically calls for Facebook to take their job when it comes to content moderation more serious. Do you want to give us a brief overview on that campaign or strategic litigation project?
Absolutely. So what we actually do is Nani's doing the strategic litigation and we are doing like the mass cases normally. No, we do, our concept is to just have a process financing fund where we finance really normal cases of people who just can't afford it in civil court and go often against insults or defamations where normally a prosecutor would say, we are not going to pursue this, you have to do that privately. So this is like our day-to-day work. And actually yesterday, we announced our first strategic litigation case. Let's see where that goes, with Renate Künast, where Renate Künast is with our help and with the Alfred Landecker Foundation, who has supported us, where we are where we are suing Facebook, and it's about a meme, an defamatory meme with a quotation that's something that Renate Künast has never said, but where she...
And Renate Künast is a member of the German Parliament for the Green Party, for everyone
that, yes.
from...
Yeah, she's a well-known politician. She used to be a minister of... she used to be a minister in one of the governments where the Greens were in power years ago, and she's still a very well-known member of the German Bundestag. and she's very involved in also as a hate speech, and combating hate speech is one of her main issues. And she's insulted online violently also by especially by the extreme right. And we have worked with her before, and we have launched, we have sued Facebook, and there was this quotation on the internet. Somebody, she was in a discussion and said something, and then somebody put something very different in her mouth, and there was her face. It's a meme where her face is in this wrong quotation. And Facebook has already labeled this quotation as wrong. But you can still see it, and it has been uploaded many times. It has been shared, and the situation right now is if that Renate Künast has to go to Facebook and find all these quotations and flag them with Facebook, and then hope in every case that Facebook, with its arbitrary community standards, will delete this content. And you can imagine that this quotation has been uploaded, I don't know, hundreds of times, and also in closed groups where she's never going to find it, but it's still there and it's defamatory. And so what we are asking Facebook right now in this lawsuit is to, when Facebook is aware that this is an illegal quote, that they not only delete this one quotation, but all the quotations that are on Facebook, also in the closed groups, and also quotations where maybe one word has changed, but the content is still the same. And these should be then they should manually look if they are not if they're in some article where, I don't know, Correctiv or some journalist is talking about this fake quotation, then absolutely not. But we think that Facebook, with all its money and its power, will be able to also manually look at these, cases that are not quite sure. They're already doing this right now with their content moderation team. So yeah. And we tried to do it secretly until the press conference, but somebody leaked it to Facebook. And yesterday at 10 was the press conference. At 11:15, Renate Künast received an email from the public policy manager of Facebook Germany, where they said, in this special case, now they will delete all the same. They will try to find all the same quotations and try to delete them, which shows that Facebook clearly doesn't want this lawsuit to go to court. But we will still go with it. And it also shows that how arbitrary the decisions on these platforms are, and how they try to evade regulation.
What's the name of the campaign?
Facebook, do your job.
Facebook, do your job. And how can people, like, watching us, is there a way for people to support it or to get involved?
Absolutely. Go to Twitter, go to Facebook, tweet, say hashtag Facebook, do your job. Support us with money, tell people about it, tell people who also are in the same situation. If you know, especially politicians, we have in our consultation lots of politicians, but also journalists or activists who have been in the same situation, and tell them to call HateAid, because we can, it would be great to support them as well, and maybe also encourage them to tell their story and online, and just put on pressure on Facebook. So I think right now you can just spread the word.
Great. And talking about this case maybe a little bit more, like when we read about digital violence, it is sometimes easy to get the impression that this is like a personal problem, like Renate Künast, who's a well-known politician, other like activists who are speaking up, like receiving a lot of hate, and it's it's sad and they need to be supported, but it's still only like this personal issue. But I read that you say that digital violence is a threat to our democracy. What do you mean by that? Like, how is it a threat to our democracy?
Let's stay with this example, because I think it's a great example to explain this. This example is an example that clearly comes from the extreme right, somebody from the extreme right, and it's just, passed around on the internet. And it can really, like, if people, it looks so real. And if people are undecided what they are supposed to think about Renate Künast, then maybe, they start to shape a certain opinion, a certain, hostile opinion against a politician. So this is like the first line. And the second line is that these memes are not sent, you know, without wanting to have another effect. Most of the time, these memes are sent, and you've said it at the beginning, Julia, to incite clicks and to incite shares. So anger and hate, and you know, if you think, oh, this can't be, then this makes you act on the internet, that makes you share things, that make you like things. So what has Renate Künast received after this meme came out? Lots of hate, lots of insults, lots of more defamatory content. And okay, Renate Künast is a very strong woman, but there there are like studies with communal politicians, or also with politicians from the German parliament, who are saying that they are thinking about not doing their job anymore, not being in another legislation, being a candidate anymore, because they have been attacked so much on the internet. So this is inciting digital violence, this kind of behavior, and it works. We have seen activists, we've seen journalists who are saying in studies that they don't want to report about certain topics anymore because they've been attacked so much on the internet. And it also influences it's not only influencing our public discourse online, but it's also going to influence our elections, because what have we seen? A woman has announced in the Green Party a couple of days ago that she's going to be, she wants to be chancellor and is going to candidate for the Green Party. A couple of days later, the internet was full of fake quotations like this one that Renate Künast has received, and with allegedly naked pictures when she was young. And you can, you know, this is like, it's a form of, you know, campaigning and propaganda that is now used. And I think if we don't have the means to act quickly in these cases, this can really influence, or this is already really influencing our public debate.
Mm-hmm. Maybe again to the audience, so if you want to ask a question, like, feel free to type it in the chat and we'll discuss it. Nani, when we talk about online hate, and you also mentioned the predictive policing example, when you look at strategic litigations and organizations that you're supporting, do you see some gaps? Like, are there like certain areas when it comes to digital rights or certain new technologies where we don't have enough lawsuits, litigation, strategic litigation campaigns, or is it like, also, it doesn't have to be new technologies, but also like topics that are not discussed that widely and that we need to talk more about in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, there are significant gaps in what is covered currently by the digital rights field as a result of its current composition. If you look around the room at any average digital rights meeting in Europe at the moment, you will see that people are mostly white, mostly male, mostly cisgender, able-bodied, etc., etc. So it basically does not reflect the society that we live in. And that also sets, you know, the course for a lot of these organizations, what they focus on in their work. So one of the things I think, for example, that you see is that there's a very actually elitist approach to the debate about privacy. It's a very narrow conversation that doesn't really take into account what this right actually means for marginalized groups. And there's a whole bunch of issues that are just basically not on the table at all, at least not in a substantial way for a lot of the organizations that are working on these issues. So what we're seeing is that the digital rights field, so organizations that call themselves digital rights organizations and organizations that work on racial, social, and economic justice are actually very far apart right now, which is something that we're trying to work on to kind of like bridge that gap. In two different ways. One is by actually looking at ways in which we can change the power structures within the ecosystem that currently exists. So rather than thinking about this as a diversity and inclusion kind of initiative, increasing the pipeline, all of those things, which is very questionable, because then you're just basically asking, like, how can we bring people into a system that's actually not supportive and that actually wasn't constructed with their engagement. We're trying to figure out like how to really kind of change the fundamentals. How can you really change the dynamics in the field and not just the composition? And another initiative that we started with is called the Digital Rights for All project, which is working with organizations that focus on racial, social, and economic justice to identify what their priorities are, and then see like how does that scale into the digital context. So say, for example, that you're working on police violence or police profiling. How does that relate to digital rights issues? So really kind of like starting from the viewpoints that are priorities for those organizations, rather than saying like, let's quote unquote include you in a debate that actually wasn't set up to address your interests and your needs.
Excellent. The homogeneous digital rights field was exactly what I wanted to talk about with you. And I know that the Digital Freedom Fund also is working on a project together with EDRI, European Digital Rights, on decolonializing digital rights. Is that also like related to the Digital Rights for All project?
Yeah, so the decolonizing process is the first part of the work that I was referring to, which is kind of like trying to really change the power structures. And the Digital Rights for All work kind of came both out of like the initial conversations that we were having in the context of the decolonizing work, where it became really clear that there was a huge gap between those different fields of actors, but also observations that when digital rights organizations were quote unquote partnering with organizations working on issues of racial, social, and economic justice, those partnerships quite often aren't equitable. They're quite extractive in nature. So just to kind of like make that very concrete, you would have an organization that has been working on social welfare issues for decades, right? In the offline context, you know, social welfare, as you used to kind of like go out and fill in a form and go to an office and all of those things. But now a lot of governments are kind of using technology in those processes, in providing essential services to people. So there, digital rights issues are coming up, which piques the interest of digital rights organizations. They see opportunities for litigation. They partner on that really specific, very narrow thing, which is basically just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because the digital manifestation of issues that are much more fundamental isn't the same as actually dealing with the issue at its core. And they kind of take that bit away and kind of like run with that without actually kind of engaging properly in an equitable manner with the organizations that have been working on these issues really long. So this made us think like, okay, we need to really start with the priorities of these organizations. What are the fundamental issues you've been trying to establish change on, and how do they relate to the digital context, and how can you then develop strategies for policy change, for advocacy, or potentially also litigation in those areas.
Nice. I can also very much recommend the blog posts that the Digital Freedom Fund team has been writing on these topics. If people want to learn more about what decolonializing digital rights means, and there's a lot of discussion of these discussions in the US, but fewer discussions in Europe. That's why it's very exciting to hear about this work. And Anna-Lena, you're supporting victims of online hate. Are there specific groups that are standing out, like certain patterns that you are seeing? I mean, we know from studies and media reports that women are disproportionately affected by online hate. Are there other patterns that you see when it comes to victims, but also perpetrators?
So what you can see, and what I think is not surprising, is that the people who have been discriminated in the analog world are already now discriminated in the online world. So yeah, so that you can say is like no. So you mentioned women, yes, that is absolutely a group that also in the digital world is discriminated and insulted, and I think women even more than in the analog world, because they are like boundaries, and there's like a violence that is happening against women that is really yeah, that is that we would not if we consider the online world as a public discourse, we would not hear in this yeah, in this extent, to this extent in the public discourse in the analog world, but maybe we would hear it more in a private context. But here the online world is probably not perceived as private. So you have women, you have LGBTIQ We have lots of LGBTIQ who come into our practice. We have BPOC. We have lots of anti-Muslim racism that we observe. And then what's a lot more special is that we have these attacks against people who are kind of like the pillars of our democracy. Journalists, more against women journalists, or more if you are BPOC journalist, you get even more hate. So you can see that it's also the discrimination is amounting when you have like this traits that can be, that can be discriminated. You have that, and then politicians, journalists, and activists. Those are groups that normally in the analog world have not been as discriminated as they are right now on the internet. And you can see a clear pattern that the extreme right is trying to discredit like pillars of democracy. In Germany, they are talking about the lying press. So, in public discourse, talking about the lying press, and then if journalists are researching, then just intimidate them, or if they're researching about racism or about right-wing parties or about climate change, then start to attack them. Same thing with politicians, especially in the local field, where they are strategically attacked by right-wing groups who just spread online hate and intimidate them. So you can see, and also in the public discourse, then they're using like these, discourse framing about the elite, that is, the political elite who is not doing anything. So you have like this, you can see that there's like groups that have started to have a voice on the internet, on Twitter, in public discussions, try to be pushed out of this discourse, marginalized groups, women. And then you have, especially in this field, like these democratic pillar groups who are also especially attacked. And this is like linked to a certain framing that is launched in discussions also by, for example, the right-wing party AfD that is now in the German parliament.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we could dig so much deeper there, and I have so many more questions, but there's also questions from the audience. So why not let's move on to them and see what people are asking. So maybe one for Nani, very timely one. Sometimes there are trade-offs between data protection rights and other rights. One example is the Corona warning app. How should those trade-offs be dealt with?
That's a great question. And the COVID context has proven very fertile grounds for governments and companies alike to argue that we need technology to fight health pandemics, right? And my issue with that is actually that we are yet to see the proof that this is actually going to help us. Trading our private data for alleged health benefits that we haven't really seen evidence of. This is not to say that we cannot use technology, that we cannot use data analysis to our benefit in those contexts, and specifically when it comes to health and issues like that. But a very critical set of questions needs to be asked all the time, and so far we're seeing a lot of governments not answering them very well. Questions about the amount of data that are actually necessary to achieve the goal that is being pursued. So the idea that you operate really on the minimum viable data sets that you need in order to pursue the goals. And then also the question of like centralized versus decentralized keeping of the data. It's very convenient to put everything in one place because it allows for a lot more flexibility and a lot more analysis, etc. But it's not necessarily the most secure, and it's also not necessarily needed in order for things like Corona apps, etc., to function properly. And then the third question is like, where is this all going to go when we no longer need these apps? Because you might decide to kind of like hand over a certain set of data to a specific party for a specific purpose. But what guarantees are being provided that this is not going to end up in someone else's hands later on? And here there's often an argument, right? But I have nothing to hide, and this is all not very sensitive, and I'm happy to make this trade-off. But if you keep in mind that actually from very kind of tiny data points, you can quite easily create pretty full profiles of people, especially if you combine those few data points with the other couple of data points that are here, that are there, all the traces that we leave everywhere online and in all the technology that we use. It's possible to profile people in quite a level of detail. And that reveals a lot about us, and that reveals a lot about us that we may not always want to choose to reveal to specific parties. So that choice disappears the more that we share. So yeah, again, very critical questions to kind of like whether or not the technology is helpful at all. Then if you want to kind of go down that route, how do we actually use it? How is it built? And what are the limitations to it?
There's this German term, Datensparsamkeit, so only collecting as little data as there's needed for a certain service, which I think is a very nice term. So maybe we can introduce that to English. Annalena, there's also a question for you. What are typically the effective means to protect yourself if you are facing insults and hate online?
I think what we can also could do as a preventive measure, and I think when I look at the cases that have become really the really bad cases that come to our consultation are the cases where people have left too many traces of their private life that can be used against them in the digital world. And Nani just said it, all these traces that we leave 10 years ago when we were on MSN and we didn't know about, we weren't aware. And so somewhere in Google, we shared our address, or we shared when we were born, or we, shared this one picture on the beach because it was so nice with our friends when we started with Facebook. And now everybody can see it, and we haven't put on our privacy shield. So I think what is important is that you really check what kind of data can we find about you on the internet. Do you really want everyone to see your private address? Do you want to know at what school your children are? Do you want to know people to know where you work? Do you really want them to see your private pictures? I remember, for example, the first hate storm against one climate activist in Germany started because right-wing activists went on her Twitter account, on her Instagram account, and found pictures of her where she was on holiday in different countries, and then just made this video about her where they said, okay, you are a climate activist and here you are flying around the world. And she was extremely discredited. So I think we really need to check on the traces that we have left online, and then this is something that we can do as a preventive measure. We can also, there have been several data leaks where the passwords of, for example, my old Hotmail account have been leaked. You can check that on there are pages where you can, for example, have I been PNUD is one of these pages from the Hasso-Plattner Institute where you can check if you have been part of this data leak, change your passwords regularly, use a password manager. These are like, it sounds like I'm telling you something that you already know, but I'm sure that 90% of the people who are listening here are using the same password for at least 2 accounts. And this is a big mistake, because if somebody finds your password, then they can, I was always wondering why somebody had hacked my Spotify account. And it was so easy because it was in the same data leak where I used my Hotmail address for my Spotify account. And when that was leaked, and they just used my email account and my password and were in my Spotify account. So, and then, so we really need to kind of, take this seriously, take preventive measures. And then we should, when people start to insult you, very quickly look for help. Also look for organizations like us, go to the police, just report things that you have seen, and also activate your network. You are not alone. If you would be attacked on the street, you would call the police, call your friends and family to help you. So call your network, say what is happening to you, ask, if you're part of a party or if you have followers, say very clearly what is happening to you right now and ask for solidarity, because the haters, and to have them, back you up. If the comments are really coming in and you can't, and it's coming so quickly, maybe you can ask a family member or a friend to take over your account and just delete the stuff and block people, and just, save maybe very defamatory contents for then later on litigation. I think what is important that you start getting away emotionally from what is happening on the internet, as you start to try to distance yourself from the violence that is happening to you, and find a network around you to support you in solidarity in taking over your account. And what we've seen also in our consultations is that people are waiting way too long to do this. So I can only say this again here. This is not something that should be taken lightheartedly. I have people who had been victims of hate storms, and really people who also have been in the public and everything, who've told me now 2 years later that they're doing trauma therapy because of this. So, and they could not admit this to themselves for a long time. And if you can't admit it to yourself, then you can't take the right measures to protect yourself. So what is happening to you is a sort of violence, and you should treat it as that. Although you don't have like a blue eye or a broken rib, it is a form of violence, and you can, the sooner you act, the better you will survive this.
Thank you, Annalena. When you're talking us through all these points, like it already makes me feel relieved that there's organizations like HateAid out there that you can go to and that you get advice from. And I don't want to know what the world looked like 5 years ago when there was no such organization around and no support. We have a question that leads us down to a more kind of, now we've been talking about very hard topics like hate online, that leads us down a more like optimistic way. So the question is, technology is clearly leading us into an increasingly polarized world. Have you found strategies not just to address the impacts of that polarization, but also lead us into a less polarized world? So are there, I mean, not an easy question, but Nani, I'm muting.
Do we find the solution to bring about world peace, basically?
Or like little steps towards it?
Well, it's a really good question. I sadly don't have a straightforward answer to that. I mean, if I did, I'd probably try and get a patent for it. But I think that it's a really good framing in the sense that we are seeing society's power structures being replicated through technology and being amplified by technology. So this is super problematic, right? But I think one of the things that is always really important to understand or to kind of like keep in mind is that all the technology is man-made, right? It's human-made, we produced it, so therefore it also reflects the way that we have organized our societies and our worlds. So then the big question is like, how do you change these power structures? Well, I mean, I would love to kind of like know how to do that as a bigger picture thing. But what we're trying to focus on at least is the ecosystem in which we do have a little bit of influence, which is the digital rights field, and hoping to kind of like bring together these different areas on that, organizations that work on technology, organizations that work on racial justice, social justice, economic justice, climate justice, and kind of see if we can bring those together to act more in unison and be increasingly intertwined, so that, you know, those ambitions, the ambitions of these organizations will change. And of course, we hope that that will create a ripple effect, and also that it will be, we can somehow kind of like forge a path that could be replicated in other ecosystems by others, knowing very well that we can't change everything by ourselves. But at least starting within this kind of like slightly smaller context, and hoping that in the end, that might actually bring about some bigger structural change.
Nice. Annalena, what are strategies that can lead us to into a less polarized world?
I think Nani really had this great speech that I can only say, yeah, I completely agree. Maybe I can make it a little bit more specific to what we do. I think lots of the division, if we look at, I mean, we do look specifically at social media. And if we look at the divide, where does it come from? If we look at people who just are silenced on social media, and we look at, you know, we've talked about these propaganda tactics of, you know, attacking people there. This is only possible because of the circumstances that we find there. And we've talked about this, private companies who set up the rules. So what are the rights? So what our goals would be to strengthen the rights of people, of people who are out there on social media. And I think in these digital spaces, people at the moment have very little rights. No? If I'm insulted online and I say, hello, Facebook, this is an insult, can you please delete it? And they say, no, we don't think it's against our community standards. Then I cannot say, hello, I go to the Facebook court, and then they decide there is none. So the only thing is, if I have money, I can, go to a lawyer and maybe start suing Facebook. So, so strengthen rights of people. And I think there's still like a wide span that we can do. There's still a lot to do, and give them the chance to at least become, and also the second thing is transparency. What is happening on these platforms? Why are they doing that? I have no idea. Facebook's only saying me, okay, this doesn't apply to all community standards, say that this is not defamatory content. Okay, thank you. This is not like a real reason. I cannot, they're not saying to me, okay, this is why. And also, how does, for example, the algorithm work? Why is what is like, for example, political ads, can I really see who is, why am I seeing this in my timeline, or why am I seeing this ad? So I think maybe where we can, like, if you ask me about a vision, about what could be like what could start as not to be divided as much as we are right now in social media, is transparency, and also more rights, that people know their rights and can enforce their rights against the platforms, against perpetrators. And I think maybe then we can get to this, an informed citizen, online digital citizenship, where people can make better choices about their data, about their privacy, about their rights, about, all these things that they do online, than they can do now, because right now they are not well-informed citizens, because they can't enforce platforms, or to show them, to give them this transparency. And I think if we go there, maybe this could be a good step to make me decide if I want to see only content that is similar to the content that I already liked, or maybe I can, in my timeline, see other content. So I can make more choices. And I think maybe this could be a good way to, not stop this polarization, because, as Nani said, this is polarization that is, it's mirrored from what we've seen in the analog world, but maybe, just level it out a little bit.
Yeah, I like that we're ending this conversation on an optimistic note. There has been a lot of food for thought, and I was thinking about how do I wrap up this conversation. And the other week I read an article in The Guardian with the title "Silicon Valley's Most Astute Critics Are Women." Zeit had a feature about how women in social organizations are fighting for more social justice, fighting for more equality in the digital world. I think the two of you are great role models when it comes to this, breaking into like homogeneous world and patterns, and showing how women can lead these topics, and how women can build organizations in that field. So thank you so much for joining us. And that said, Ashoka is, of course, also always looking when it comes to diversifying their fellows, their fellowships. We're looking for new leaders in the field, new ideas. So if people have recommendations, then please send them to the team in Germany, or to an international team. There's one called Next Now. One of the fields that Next Now is working on is tech and humanity. So there's also within Ashoka a strong focus on digital rights and human rights. And yeah, we're out of time, but we have a get together, and Annika is going to paste us the link to the get together into the chat. We're going to use Wonder Me, and this is going to go on for half an hour. We can just have conversations, follow-up conversations, or grab a drink or some water. So please post the link. Yeah, the link is already there. Wonder Me. And thanks for joining us. I'm saying goodbye on Zoom and hello in a minute on Wonder Me. Thanks for joining, Nani and Anna-Lena, and see you on the other platform.
Thank you for the great conversation.
Thank you very much, Julia.
Thanks.